Welcome, everyone, and welcome, panel. It is indeed an important question we're going to discuss, and it's more like a seminar table than a series of lectures. We all know that the climate is changing and it has enormous consequences, and we're going to wonder if it also has consequences for the performing arts, et cetera, and what the interaction between climate change and performance might be. The panel has been convened actually by Branislav Yakelevich, who is the chair of performance studies and theater at Stanford University, a consortium editor of TDR. TDR has a group of universities that collaborate. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Branislav.
Thank you, Richard. And one small correction, a former chair of...
oh my, you're lucky.
Very quickly, this is now the second part of our consortium issue. I co-edited the first part with our colleague Diana Lucer. It came out in November 2021 under the title Peripetia, indicating that tipping point in the climate crisis. In collaboration with TDR, we decided rather than having one issue, taking one whole issue for the consortium, to split it in two. So in the first issue, we had commissioned articles and also articles that came in through an open call. And in the second part, we decided to try and reach a broader kind of range of contributors, and we organized a forum. So Matt will say a few words about that.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Matthew Smith, also former chair of Theater and Performance Studies at Stanford. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this second issue, which we entitled Performing Against the Catastrophe, in which I co-edited with Branislav, where the previous issue contemplated the peripeteia, or the turn. This one really turned its attention on what we could call the collapse. It included more than 20 short essays from a wide variety of artists, of academics, and activists, some of whom join us here today. Essays included reflections on climate change and prison performance, on so-called coal theatrics in Australia, on the discussion series Burning Futures in Berlin, on ecological performances of the artist Maria Lucia Cruz Correa, performances of waste and reclamation in garbage dumps of Rio de Janeiro, performing the Anthropocene among Pacific Island populations, and in a separate essay by the Chinese government at the Beijing Olympics. So it was a very broad scope. This is just a taste I have given you, and I strongly encourage all of you to read the full buffet. I will now turn things over to Richard.
All right, so as I said, we want to have a seminar rather than a series of prepared presentations. And also, I don't want to take time to introduce all of you. So I'm asking, the first time you speak, tell everybody who you are in a sentence. Well, a lot of us know everybody. Some of us know only somebody, but let's assume that nobody knows anybody, and just you have to say a sentence about yourself. So I'm giving you 3 questions here as prompts. You can deal with these questions, or you can take off in another direction. The first one is, what are the benefits and problems of using the word catastrophe with its classical curtain-closing connotations as a way of thinking about climate change? That's number 1. Number 2, to what degree can performance, theater especially, but of course, performance art, dance, music, and so on, impact the public awareness of environmental justice and the impact of climate change on the global South? And third, over the past century and a half, new kinds of social and political crises have prompted the emergence of new kinds of protest performances. Can we detect and perhaps replicate specific features of protest performances that are emerging in response to climate change? How effective have they been so far? How can we make them more impactful? I'm thinking as a model kind of the social changes in Europe in the 19th century gave rise to realism and the Ibsen plays and so on and so forth. The Vietnam War in the United States gave rise to guerrilla theater and so on and so forth. So what has climate change given rise to in the world of performance? So those are three possible prompts. Please don't feel yourself limited to them, but if you would like to deal with them, that would be great. And rather than raising hand when we're all in different continents, just speak up. And if it gets chaotic, I'll intervene, but I don't think it will. And don't feel shy about more or less interrupting each other, so it's like a conversation if we can. So who would like to go first? If I have no volunteers, I'll ask. So Yuna, you've done a lot of thinking about these things and writing. And what do you think of one, two, or three of these prompts, or whatever you would like to discuss?
Thank you, Richard. I'm Yuna Choudhary. I teach in the departments of English, Drama, and Environmental Studies at NYU, and I'm also Dean for the Humanities at NYU. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for this invitation, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I also really like the three questions, and I think that first question about the word catastrophe is a good one to start with, because I think words are really important in this context now, partly because there's a lot being said about climate change now, in the public discourse, and there's certain words that are rising to the surface and becoming buzzwords, and I think we have to be vigilant about them. One of the buzzwords I'm very unhappy about is the word sustainability. We hear that a lot, and I think there's a danger in assuming that we know what we want to sustain. So for me, a catastrophe is not my preferred word when talking about climate. If we're talking about climate change, I prefer to say climate chaos. But in general, I want to avoid thinking about the climate as a problem, but rather to think about our way of living, the ways that we've established our civilization as the problematic thing that we have to be paying attention to. So for me, the focus is really on changing our relationship to what we now call the more than human world. And so I'm very interested in relational models, in coming up with new ways, new metaphors for thinking about how humans and the planet can relate to each other. The prevailing metaphors are, there's a sentimental one, nature as mother, and then there's the real one, the one we actually have been living by, which is nature as enemy. And I think both of those are really have done their work. So I've been looking for other metaphors. Friendship. My project Dear Climate is all about exploring friendships. Diplomacy. Bruno Latour talked about diplomacy with Gaia. Beth Stevens and Annie Sprinkle talk about sexuality, Earth as lover instead of Earth as mother. And recently I'm working on thinking about studentship as a model of relating to the more than human world.
So,
and I'll be happy to say more about that.
So who would like to jump in response to Yuna? Or yes, Daniel.
I'll jump in. My name is Daniel Lalem, and I'm a theater researcher and performance maker based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I've worked there over the last several years, creating street theater for the local chapter of Extinction Rebellion in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I definitely I resonate with what Una is basically saying about these very charged, sort of highly dramatic words like catastrophe, apocalypse, crisis. Versus these more humble, grounded, relational words that Una is using. I think that instinctively we're sort of reaching for words like apocalypse, crisis, catastrophe, or tragedy. We're reaching for some kind of archaic power that we might be able to wield to sort of wake people up or wake ourselves up. but the words often circulate in a very kind of banal, effectively neutral way in popular discourse. And then the flip side of that is, I think, getting caught in a sort of state of negative inflation, like to use a Jungian term, instead of the hubris of, you know, we're this glorious species at the center of it all. Now we're this wretched species at the center, still at the center of it all, like Oedipus, like gouging out his own eyes and saying, you know, I'm the most wretched creature that's ever walked the earth. So yeah, I think that ways of sort of dissolving the anthropocentric drama and opening up discourses and ways of being that are more humble and sober and realistic is the way forward. Not that artists can't play with those grandiose drama,
Right,
for satire or whatever.
let me call on Gloria first, then Branislav.
Hi, I'm Clara Benedict. I'm an artist and also a performance maker. I really like that term. Who has worked and actually lived, amongst other things, for 6 years at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. And I'm the author of Science and Art for Life's Sake, How Partnerships Between Artists and Scientists Can Support the Transformation Towards Sustainability, which was actually edited by Chantal. Yes. So I just thought I will throw in a word on also the specific term of apocalypse, which of course is being used a lot now, and also a lot of plays being written with sort of an apocalyptic ending. And the discussions I've had with colleagues in the last weeks and months was really about you know, what does apocalypse even mean? I mean, isn't that really a first world problem? Because the worlds of indigenous people have already collapsed. That certain islands are collapsing as we speak. So isn't that kind of now a first world problem to talk about? So whose world is collapsing now? I'm keeping it brief.
Yes,
For now.
Branislav.
Yeah, I just want to direct the third question perhaps to Angelina and remind everyone that this webinar is expanding the forum. Angelina Davidova did not make it into this issue, but she generously joined the webinar. So we want to hear from her.
Yes, and in a future issue, Angelina, we really want you in TDR, please.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for this kind invitation. Thank you, Branislav, and thank you, Richard. A short introduction from my side. My name is Angelina Davidova. I'm originally from Russia, and I've been based in Berlin for the last year. My background is in climate journalism, climate communication, and climate lecturing. And I've also been someone involved with the UN climate negotiations since 2008. So I'll be speaking from a slightly different perspective. And I very much look forward to an intense exchange of ideas and also perspectives on the topics we're discussing. So I first would like to actually get connected to the third question which we had, and that is what kind of new forms of art and what kind of new forms of theater performance and other kinds of did we see appearing. I've been involved in quite a number of art performance festivals, workshops, which will bring in together scientists, activists, and artists and performers. And I almost have a feeling that the whole awareness about climate change and the whole need to do something about climate change brought to life and keeps bringing to life a lot of multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary projects. And we see some wonderful projects when artists start cooperating with scientists, with scientific data sets, with computer models. And I see a lot of very interesting I don't know, sometimes even know what to call them, but like something in between science and performance and art coming to life, and also activism. And as I say, I'm always very happy to be involved in such projects. So this is my first short remark, and my second remark would be around the first question about the wording. As a journalist and as a communicator, like wording is crucial. And there are very large ongoing discussions within the climate communicators community about what kind of words we should use. Climate crisis, climate catastrophe, like many others have appeared in the last few years. And I think a very common approach here is that with words, and here I'm speaking on behalf more of like climate communicators, and also something which has been very actively discussed, say, at the UN level, right? So whenever we go to UN negotiation session, there's always some sort of performance by activists taking place every day, dozens of them. And this is on one hand. On another hand, there's a lot of talk about, we're speaking about very like specific and technical issues here. We need to bring it to larger audience. And how do we do it? Through art. So let's encourage artists to do something about climate change. This is also what we have a lot at the UN levels. And just jump back to the wording. I think a common approach from the climate communicators side would be, with words, on one hand, our task is to show that it is a serious issue, but then on another hand, not to scare people too much, because scaring them too much would most likely lead them to a feeling of powerlessness, which would just prevent them from doing anything. And the ultimate mission is to make people aware and also maybe make people make a change. I would stop here.
So Chantal, you have not spoken yet. I'd like to call on you to see what you have to say about this.
Yes, my name is Chantal Poirier. I'm a playwright and the artistic director of an organization called the Arts and Climate Initiative. To come back to the word catastrophe, it's not a word that I have used. It's also not a word that I like so much in relation to the climate crisis, because to me it suggests a fixed point in time. You either prevent a catastrophe or you recover from a catastrophe. But I think it takes away from the fact that the climate change is something ongoing, and it's not. There's not any one thing any one point where we can say this is the catastrophe. There's actually a number of catastrophes with different communities around the world. And it reminds me a little bit of the conversation around the 1.5 degrees of warming, where it was such a goal, and then because it was presented as such a goal that we had to stay under, that now there's the difficulty of communicating that even if we go over, it's not game over, right? There's still work to be done. It's not like at 1.5 it's a catastrophe and then we have to completely give up trying.
So let me throw something else out here for all of you. In response to climate change, there's been an enormous amount of technological and scientific exploration, fusion energy, using hydrogen, whatever. I don't see personally the same kind of creative response from the arts community. It's just not of the same kind. It's like, yes, it's protests, but we've seen all that before. There's nothing comparable to fusion energy. There's nothing comparable to these enormous effort to find totally new ways of dealing with this. That's number one. Number two, of course, in the Western mythology, we have a climate, quote, catastrophe earlier. That's the deluge, the flood, Noah. And the solution to that climate crisis was elitist. Take two of everything, your own family, the rest of them, they're going to die and drown. And then we'll start all over again. So this seems to me to be a huge choice facing the global north. Do we say about the global south, finally, we're going to put up huge barriers, North America, Western Europe is going to survive, and the rest of them will really sink. And we are in an arc, and the rest of them will sink. Or are we going to try to save everyone? If we try to save everyone, how? And how do we do that in relationship to the arts? I mean, these are huge, huge ethical choices. I think politically, we're already making the choice that the global south will get lip service, but the borders are up. You know, they're sinking boats in the Mediterranean. We're keeping people from the Latin America coming. These are not all climate refugees, but they're the arbingers of huge waves of climate refugees. So these are huge problems, I think, that I don't see the arts community facing. And as I say, with the Noah's Ark metaphor, there is that choice that the Noah's Ark metaphor is only the few survive and they start all over again. The other metaphor is it's a big boat and we try to keep everybody. And how do the arts respond to this? I don't know if anybody has. Yes, Gloria.
I mean, if you look at how much money goes into technology, science and technology, and how much money is going into supporting eco-theater, then the answer is clear. And
Right.
maybe there's some fault in the arts world, you know, to not having made a case for itself. But it's a question. I mean, those artists who do it, and there is a handful who have been, or maybe it's 100. We don't know. It's another problem. We don't know who is doing what and who is seriously engaging with this. But we're making our lives very difficult because there is just, we have to find little loopholes where we can get some funding so we can work on this.
Yuna?
A couple of things, Richard, in response to your what you were saying about the global South, I think we have to remember and recognize how much is actually going on in those parts of the world, how active the environmental and climate movements are in places like, India, the South Pacific. It's not really just about us going to save them. This has to be about collaboration. And I agree with Gloria, we need to do the work of recognizing who is active out there that we might be able to support. So it's very much a moment of informing ourselves about our partners who are already out there very, very actively working. I mean,
And are they doing anything, new art forms, or are they using the old protest art forms and demonstrations for this new cause?
I think it's a whole incredible range of things. And the thing about theater is that the way theater works is to shape and reshape the cultural imagination. And that takes time. That's at that works at the level of hearts and minds, ideology. And so it has to have a different temporality. And what I see emerging as a kind of distinctive climate art form, and I think Chantal's work is an example of it, I'm seeing a lot of artists do what I think is, I call it enduring performance, endurance performance. It has to do with rethinking the temporality of performance. So we've got Chantal, who has the Arctic Circle project. She's made a commitment to work for years in every country that touches the Arctic Circle and do the research, connect with people there, and then tell their stories in her place. There's Deke Weaver, who has a lifelong project called The Unreliable Bestiary. A lifelong project. He's doing a performance for each letter of the alphabet. He's going to die before he finishes it. But it's the same kind of thing. It's individual artists making a commitment to some kind of, you could call it sustainability, but it's resilience. It's just putting your energy and your goodwill, your heart and soul towards something that you're committed to. It also takes the form of long performances. Sarah Cameron Sunder's 36.5, which is, she stands in full tidal cycle for 13 hours. The wonderful piece called How to Build a Forest, where they built a forest in 8 hours and then took it down again. So I think that, we're teaching ourselves as a species to rethink time, to learn about deep history and far futures, because that is the scale in which climate actually occurs and makes sense. It's true that it's happening, feeling like a catastrophe now, but as Chantal was saying, this is slow change, slow violence, slow whatever you want to call it. But so I just wouldn't be so insistent on anything making an immediate difference, and having that kind of.
So Branislav and then Chantal, please, and then Matt.
Just very quick note. These boundaries, just from the perspective of editing these two parts of TDR on this issue, when you work on a project such as that one, you can see how real and how firm these walls and divisions are. I agree with Yuna that there are a number of people worldwide working on these issues, but actually the climate crisis makes very visible and tangible the boundaries between and walls between the industrialized North and West and the global South. And it takes a lot of work and effort to go over those ideological and economic boundaries.
Yeah. Chantal?
Yeah, I wanted to say that from my point of view, things are changing. I know most about theater in the US and in Canada, and definitely I can tell a difference between what is being done now versus what was being done when I started, which was 15 years ago. There's incredible creativity from the parts of theater makers and playwrights, and I think actually a lot of the resistance comes within our community, right? There is resistance from the institution who are 10, 15 years behind and are still sort of presenting the things they're used to present in the models they're used to using.
Right.
So like Yuna said, it takes a while, and we have to keep pushing those boundaries for the institution to come on board.
Matt and then Daniel.
Yeah. Sure. I just wanted to add maybe another spin on this question. And Yuna, I think it's wonderful your point about the long time, the extension of temporality. I was wondering about if we could maybe if people had reflections on space as well as time, because what I'm sometimes seeing is a kind of dissonance that you've spoken before and others have about the importance of the local in environmental performance. But at the same time, like Angelina spoke about the importance of big data, and this is absolutely a global phenomenon as never before. And so one of my questions is what do we make of this dissonance, the desire to act locally, the global nature of the phenomenon? Are there new forms of performance that can accommodate that dissonance?
Yes,
I don't know.
Daniel.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't know if I can quite speak to that because I was kind of following the previous thread. Maybe what I'll say will kind of resonate with that a little bit. But I was just going to point out what I see as something emerging in terms of activist theater or a protest performance that's happening in non-theatrical or non-performance venues, like out on the street or in public or private spaces. And that is, I think, the emergence of ritual, mythic, archetypal forms and figures as containers. I think, Richard, if we're going for the analogy with fusion energy, like what does performance have, on an energetic level? It has what it can do is tap into these really deep energies of the human psyche, of the human being, and manifest those. And if we're talking about time and space, locally, and so that there is a profound experience for those performing and for those in immediate proximity to it. And I see that there are certain kinds of figures, certain kinds of performances, like particularly the Red Rebel Brigade of Extinction Rebellion UK. I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, but it's almost like it's a mysterious kind of Buto style troupe that moves through, quite a lot of hubbub on the street and transforms the relationships often between the activists and the police just through the mere fact of their presence. So, and I think that there are energies and emotions that are pushing through in these kind of archetypal ritual forms, but they're still very inchoate, and often they're very small because they're very inchoate because often we're as activist artists, we're throwing something together at the last moment. It's not a well-honed or well-grooved sort of ritual form that can contain these kind of energies. So they're coming through in very small outbursts. And what I guess what I'm interested in seeing over the coming years is if artists start to be capable of creating these basically like ritual forms that they bring to bear, whether it's on a theatrical stage or a street theater action, that can summon and hold these kind of intense energies of, let's say, grief, or maybe there's an archetypal form that can hold the sort of shadow aspects of sort of domination and exaltation in destruction of the world. I think that we're sort of trying, as artists making street theater, we're trying to go in those directions, but we're sort of faltering and imploding because we don't have the rehearsal time, we don't have the budgets, we don't have the sort of like psychic conditions.
I agree with that, but our artists have never had the same resources as the people who make war. Just, you know, Sophocles had a lot of money, but the people who took the armies out had more. I mean, so that's nothing new. We have to live with it. Angelina, you haven't said anything for a while, and then Gloria wants to speak. So let's start with you, and then Yuna wants to speak too.
Thank you, Richard. I would like to react quickly to what Matthew was saying, and Matthew was bringing into our discussion about how to balance this very local environmental dimension with the global trends which are happening. This is actually also a large ongoing debate in the whole climate communication or climate journalism community. And I think an answer which we often come to within the climate narratives and climate storytelling would be always going like back and forth, global to local, local to global, and also looking at kind of various dimensions like, you know, close up and then a more general picture and kind of going in between. But once again, this is something which is like discussed a lot, and it's actually, there are a few attempts to kind of play with it and also to think like if you think in terms of, say, hyper objects, right? Timothy Morton, like how do we show them? How do we speak about them? How do we write about them? How do we overall engage this in our discussions? On another hand, what I think from the, say, climate expert, whatever community, there's a big expectation, I would say, for new climate narratives to appear. And that is what we often see in literature, in drama, in like wherever other forms of art, is that we still see a lot of linear climate narratives. And the whole thing about kind of climate, our understanding of climate, it's that it's not linear, right? It's all about very complex systems. It's all about interconnectedness. There are very few linear trends, also very few linear graphs. And in a way, the very big question for me is also someone who thinks about it, how to make more of the plots and narratives to be less linear and more complex, how to show the interconnectedness of the world. I mean, the whole idea is that the West is trying to protect itself and let the whole of the world die is also a linear narrative in the way. We in the West are very much dependent on resources which are coming from the global South, right? Yeah. And on another hand, you know, what about resources? What about waste? What about production? What about consumption? What about ecosystem services? What about rainforest? I mean, all this very complicated interconnectedness, very often they don't come to a story at all. It's just, you know, graphs and interconnectedness and waves around the world, and the planet is rotating. So I wonder how do we go about that? Right.
And it's also, I'll get to, it's complicated by the fact that the powers that be in the world seem to want to continue business as usual. We're still waging our wars, you know, and that takes a huge amount of effort. You know, Ukraine war, aside from everything else it is a huge attention getter and polluter in and of itself. And we want to do economics the same way. So it's like there hasn't been a fundamental shift in objective. It's like the climate thing is an add-on, whatever. Gloria.
Yeah, I'm actually now going to just respond to what was just said before me. Yeah, I mean,
yes, please.
In recent weeks and months, I've also noticed a new gap opening up between. So still the natural science narrative is very present in all these conversations, in the media, in the UN, and basically also how I first learned it when I joined YASA, which was the problem started 1850, because that's when the CO2 emissions started to rise. And so really it was Industrial Revolution, and then the problem started. And that's how now, given the predominance of the natural sciences in this discourse, it's starting to think about it. Whereas in the last couple of years, it was quite late, the humanities have come in and started to explain a different story, which is more about what we've already discussed now, that the problem started 3,000 years ago, with this idea that humans will are conquerors of nature. And so the problem doesn't start in 1850. And I think Amitav Ghosh makes a very beautiful trajectory there in the nutmeg curse. But that idea that the problem that you're facing now started more 3,000 years ago and not 150 years ago is not dominant in these discussions now, not at the UN, not at the scientific conferences. And so now the world starts to focus on how do we reduce CO2 emissions? And that's the only goal we have, instead of having this broader. And I think that's where we, in the humanities and also the artists, really need to step in.
Yes, I agree. Who else? Yuna, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I wanted to respond to also to Matthew's question about expanding the spatial field as along with expanding the temporal field in theater practice, and this issue of connecting the local, which is where theater actually occurs, with our awareness of the global. And one of the practices that I'm seeing that I think has great potential is a cultivation of what I'm calling strategic universalism. You all remember strategic essentialism, strategic anthropocentrism. So this is strategic universalism. And what that is artists who have these long-term projects, which they take to different communities, build collaborations in those communities. So they're doing a similar project, but with different groups, and with a lot of patient research, understanding, conversation, invitation, so that what we're beginning to see is theater being put to the effort to learn how to collaborate and how to kind of take care of each other, how to listen to each other and work together, which is the thing we're going to need most as time goes on. Because, the one thing we know about climate change is there's going to be suffering. We don't know anything else, but we do know that. And it's already started. And we're going to need to know how to take care of ourselves and of each other. And we'll have to do that by rooting ourselves in places, but also by learning how to work with people or collaborate with people who are extremely different from ourselves. So I think that these practices, and I'm talking about the cultivation of universal, strategic universalism, is something that theater, just by its nature, because it's such a collaborative form, we work together to make shows. So I think that that's something that we can contribute and are contributing, and it's happening along with this endurance work that a lot of people are doing.
So here's something that just came in as a question and answer. I know it's a little bit before, but I think this is something that would be very useful. I'm a college student just getting started in eco-theater and theater for environmental change. What are some recommendations of artists or companies or playwrights to become more educated on eco-theater? It's a very simple but very direct, and I think a very useful question. If anybody could just pop in with a few names or what have you, or whatever, to help this undergraduate student and anybody else who's listening. Yes, Yuna.
read Chantal Bilodeau's plays. Read Chantal's anthologies that she's created from the biannual climate theater action that she's been doing for years. So we've already got a corpus there. Read Earthquakes in London by Mike Bartlett.
And read TDR, of course.
TDR.
And get your theater program to sign on to do climate change theater action this year, 2023. The next round's coming up in a few months, and
Yes.
you'll get the Google Drive with all the scripts, and you can sort through those and decide which ones you want to do. I think Chantal, you should say something to this.
Yes,
this young person.
these are very good practical suggestions that, especially if we're addressing undergraduates and can move forward, it'd be fabulous. Chantal?
I would also say I've been curating a series of essays on HowlRound, Theater in the Age of Climate Change, and there's all kinds of artists who write about their work there, so that's a good place to start. Superhero Clubhouse in New York does wonderful work. Katie Pearl has done amazing work. E.M. Lewis is also a great writer, also in the US. She's written several plays that are about climate. I just curated, worked on the submission process for a contest, a playwriting contest. And these are not published plays, but keep an eye out for Jessica Huang, who was the winner. She's incredible. And Richard, she's one of the ones who's writing stuff that is novel. And Catherine Gwynn was another one, and Genevieve Simon. These are all wonderful writers that are really passionate about communicating about the climate.
Good.
And there's also...
Yeah, go ahead, Gloria.
No, there's also a book, it was published in the UK, called 100 Plays to Save the World.
Right. And I'm just told by Mary Ellen Sanford, TDR's associate editor, that we'll be posting videos of Sarah Cameron Sunday's work on TDR, and you can see some of that, which are right there. So listen, Christian, are we ready for questions and things from the general public here? It's 1:45. It's up. What do you think? Or should we continue here?
No, excuse me, you literally just beat me to it, Richard. I was just about to pop the camera back on.
Okay.
And Mary Ellen Sanford also says to participants to send lists of suggested readings and websites so that she can post them on the TDR website. So just while we were just talking about Mary Ellen there. There are a few questions. The first one I'd like to start with is from Brenda Ledley, who says she agrees that we need to bring scientists, activists and artists together to learn how to tell the climate story in the name of change. But what about Indigenous knowledge keepers who have lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years? Should their voices also be at the table?
Yeah, we had a wonderful contribution in our first part from Ailton Cranach, an Indigenous leader, activist, and profound thinker from Brazil. I recommend going and reading his, it's a transcript of his performance that he did with a young theater artist there in Brazil. And he makes really an important point, illustrating how really the whole talk about the apocalypse and catastrophe and all of that is mistaken. He at one point says that certain cultures throughout the world have already experienced apocalypses and catastrophes of their cultures, and they survived. And we have to learn a great deal from them.
Yes, agreed. Christian?
Yes, thank you, Branislav. We have a couple of other questions from Lindsay Goranson. Can any of the panelists share any thoughts about connecting with scientific collaborators for works in progress? Gloria.
Yes, Gloria.
I can help. I have a large network of scientists. So if you can write to me with the specific theme, and I might be able to connect you. But it's true, it's always a challenge. How do you get how can you? Yeah, but I'm happy to help.
Okay.
Yuna?
There will be an email address included in the email that Cambridge sends around within about a week or so. People are really welcome to reply to that, and we'll do our best to forward any other questions and so on.
Yuna, you wanted to answer that too?
I'm just going to probably say something a little cranky on this subject of collaborating with artists, with scientists. I think it's extraordinarily important. I think humanists and artists have been very good about reaching out and paying attention and learning from scientists. From the other direction, however, I think many scientists have a profound misunderstanding of what it is we do. And they think of us as
Flies on the cheese.
as people who are going to, as they say, tell their story. They don't understand that theater and making culture is a mode of knowledge production. It's not just translating other people's messages. When we make theater, we actually think, we all learn to think and feel and orient ourselves to reality in a different way than when we're doing science. We have to be listening to each other from both sides. And so far, I think we have been doing a very good job, especially in the field of science technology studies, STS, and anthropology, philosophy of science, all those. But I really think we all should start thinking about how to get our scientists to understand what it is we do and how important we could be to the joint project of addressing the climate chaos.
Well, I've worked with scientists for 9 years now, and it worked. It takes a bit of time. At the beginning, of course, I was planted into a science institute, right, a natural science institute. And of course, at the beginning, was like, what is this now? But after years, so it was quite clear, and there is a lot of respect. But of course, it's also up to you as an artist to explain that what you just said up front. I think that, no, we're not going to be your new fancy science communication project. Yeah. We are here to transform the scientific knowledge into something else. But I've really only had positive experiences once this was made clear from the beginning.
Excellent. Perhaps you could write some more about this for TDR, Gloria, just exactly what this is, with even a roadmap for people who want to engage in this kind of dialogue. I mean, C.P. Snow, many, many years ago, talked about the two communities, the scientific and the humanities community. Unfortunately, I think some of what he said all those years ago still obtains, that it's not simply a separation, but it's a different mode of thinking. It's a different way of thinking, inductive reasoning, and intuitive expression or something or other. So I think anything we can do to bridge that gap and get people to work together be very important. Angelina?
Just a very short comment on my side regarding the cooperation with the scientists. What I see in the last few years is the growing community of people who are called science communicators, and who are very often trying to kind of stand in between, like, old school hardcore scientists and other people, right? Journalists, artists, performers. And I see a growing community of these people, and very often, like, all the major research institutions and scientific institutions would now have someone who is responsible for, like, science communication. So I also work a lot with the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research here in Germany, and many other similar institutions. And it's a growing field. And I think very often building a team which would also include people like this, who kind of on one hand understand the way science works, but on the other hand also understand how other sectors might work or might function, that could be an interesting pattern. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I really have to jump in here and ask a very critical question. What has science communication, because it's been a field for a while, done for 30 years? Greta Thunberg came and the message came across. So And then of course there's this confusion that we as artists are not doing the same. There's something that the activists do, which is raising awareness, which is mobilizing and so on. And there's then something that artists can do, which is ask the really deep question, transform this knowledge. And what science communication is doing would be something else again. So we have to really be very clear about who is doing what. And what the responsibility of scientists is and how far that goes, where the activists can fill the gap. I mean, that's basically what I write about. So
Angelina,
this
do you want to
currently
respond to that?
but science communication itself really has failed for 30 years.
But let Angelina say what she wants to say in response to this.
I might not agree to that. And I'm
Yes,
also
okay.
not someone who says there was nothing before Greta Thunberg. And I've been someone who's been involved in this, and I saw there was something before Greta.
Right.
And it's almost like saying there were no representation of climate before the movie Don't Look Up, right? There was nothing before Don't Look Up, and now we have Don't Look Up, and we have this, right? It's kind of similar.
Right.
I almost feel like when we speak about climate communication in general now, there's so much less about general communication for everyone, like for millions, and so much more about more detailed, targeted communication. Also, like what you can do with art or performances, but also what the science communicators are doing. Some of the science communicators are talking to businesses. Some of the science communicators are talking to, I don't know, local communities. Some of the science communicators are talking to children, and those will be completely different audiences. And a lot of science communicators are actually based within the large scientific research institutions and are trying to kind of package all the information which they have, and in my opinion, produce wonderful multimedia projects, videos, whatever. So it's a very diverse field. So in a way, I would not be I don't know what the right word to say.
Negative.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
but I mean, the point is more, okay, it's maybe a little bit exaggerated that nothing happened before, but something very big happened in 2019. But in any case, I think it's very important that we kind of clarify the roles of scientists, science communication, activists, artists, and that we can create a coherent puzzle to have a full picture so we can move
I think
forward.
where the two of you agree is obviously that there needs to be communication between scientists and scientific knowledge and artists and artistic knowledge, and that they're both ways of producing knowledge, as Yuna said. Christian, are there other questions? We have time for one or two more.
Do you have time for a quick one or two further questions?
Yes. So
Dorita sends greetings from New Zealand and is wondering where the representatives from the Global South are being heard or participating in this discussion.
Well, we've already dealt with that. Obviously, it'd be great to have representatives from the Global South sitting around this table. To some degree, Yuna is and isn't, but the table is the table. I don't want to take the time to say why who's not here is not here. We all recognize.
I suppose to my mind, the question is less about maybe this specific panel, but maybe where the conversation is also being had in those regions, I suppose. Or
Brecht has a wonderful quip in his stories of Mr. Keutner. He says something along the lines, it's don't trust people to invite you to the table, they need to invite you to the kitchen. So I think Global South needs to be at the place where really solutions are sought and where decisions are made. So, you can't set the table and say, come and say your 2 bits and then we move on the same old way. There has to be a real deep integral integration of these voices into this whole dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And if we were to convene this table again, we would try to make sure that there were actual artists and scientists and activists from those places.
We have that in the forum.
Yes, we have it in the issue. We just don't have it this morning.
Yeah,
perfect. Joe Lipkin says, great conversation, everybody. And she just wants to emphasize that local performance can take place in many non-traditional settings. they say, I produced the climate change plays in many different settings, most recently in a series of art galleries, which attracted a different audience and was a more affordable offer. There is an essay in this on this in Chantal's new anthology. Thank you for that, Joan. There really isn't too much more time for questions, I'm afraid, but we do have some still left to answer. What we'll do here at Cambridge is collate those and send them round to our panelists. And then if you have anything to add to those in terms of answers and responses, we'll curate those and package them up to send out to everybody who registered for this webinar in about 7 days' time, 5 to 7 days' time.
So I want to thank everyone, all, 7 of the panelists and the people from Cambridge. This has been a very exciting, at least for me, and I hope for many, for you and for the viewers, discussion. It's just the opening, of course, and what Branislav and his team has put together in the consortium issue of TDR is also very exciting, and I'm glad that we've had so many participants. So thank you one and all. Let's hope that the world is, moving in the right direction at some levels. And I think Yuna's fundamental optimism is something that we could all sit down at the table and take a bite of. So maybe catastrophe with a little bit of salsa or something to give it
Invited to my kitchen.
Yeah, yes, right. Invite you to your kitchen. Little masala catastrophe. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, Cambridge. Thank you, Christian, Emma, Amy, everybody. I applaud you and see you later in life. Thank you very much.